in 2010, but we are so excited. We're one of the few places in the country, states, that have a Women's Heritage Center that honors our past, our present, and our future. And you can tell our theme is up on the board, adding her story to history to tell our story. Because there's so many places and books that have left women out of history, so that's part of our aim. We have a theme each year. This year it's Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, which you'll see here. And you'll also be hearing Women of Goddard talk about the display that's in the back. And I know some of you have been looking at it. The women that are there are featured on that display. And the person that owns this building has been wonderful and gracious enough to let us use this space. So we hope you'll get a chance to look at the board, to look at the back displays. And then the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame, which used to be a plaque in Annapolis. Every year there are 5 women inducted, and that used to be it. After they were inducted and went to the governor's house for dinner, they just had a plaque with their name on it. So now it's been moved. If you look back at what's lighted up, these are many of the women that have been inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame, and we will be adding the other names soon. And we also want to honor the unsung heroines that have done so much for us. It could be teachers, it could be members of our family, mentors, and you'll see over on this window, these are women who were suggested by people who have visited to come and be honored on this board. Then one of the Unsung Heroines groups that we honored last month was Women Veterans and Rosie the Riveters, women of World War II. And we had over 100 people there. We had wonderful stories of what these women went through. They were from each area of the armed services, and Brigadier General was also here welcoming them, Wilma Rudolph, I'll try that again. Wilma Bott, who directs the Women's Military Memorial at Arlington Cemetery. And there are displays honoring these women in the back. It was a very, very moving day, and we really appreciate all that they did for us. So we are glad that you're here. We also did a women in suffrage display earlier, and we usually have a kids' curiosity corner where younger people who come get to do their own projects and activities. We just didn't have room to leave it up this year. So we are thrilled to have you. The other thing is our volunteers. People that volunteer at the center, again, want to raise their hands. The 2 people who checked you in. And so we're a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization. And we are always looking for more volunteers. Over by the cookies, again, there's a sheet that if you want to sign up. And NASA Goddard became a major partner of us, did those posters and that display. And then a set of that poster went to every middle and high school in the state of Maryland from NASA Goddard. So we were absolutely thrilled. And then they developed a book that honored a lot of these women that responded to surveys. So very quickly, I will go through Claire Parkinson first. And you can see I have them tabbed. They're all in the book. Claire uses satellite data to study sea ice in the Arctic and Antarctic, and you'll see pictures of her in the Antarctic on her slides, and manages a major Earth-observing satellite, Aqua. She's written many, many books, co-authored many books, and 33 years at NASA Goddard. And one of the quotes that she has in her book, "It is such a privilege to be a contributor to a mission that is helping humanity in so many ways. And all of the women that have written something all talk about what a joy and a pleasure and an honor and the teamwork and collaboration." Next is Florence Tan, who is an electrical engineer. She's designed electronics that have been used on orbiters such as Cassini, that is still collecting valuable data as it orbits around Saturn. And the instruments on Curiosity, have you all heard of that? The new Mars rover? Yeah. Very instrumental in doing that. That's Florence. That's Florence. Then Mary Cleave, who is a NASA environmental engineer originally, she flew twice on the space shuttle into space and has donated the shirt that she wore and a lot of the other objects that she took with her into space. She's among the first 6 American women to go into space and worked at NASA in Houston, Texas, at its national headquarters here and at the Goddard Space Flight Center. Working at Goddard and being part of a team that helps increase our understanding of our home planet is really rewarding, and it is also great fun. And again, this has been a common theme. And then our youngest member of our panel today is Zakiya Tomlinson, aerospace engineer. She's been lucky enough to work at 3 NASA centers in Florida, Texas, and now in her home state of Maryland. Zakiya's mother is smiling proudly, as are Florence's parents right here. She has been interested in space since she was a little girl and now is living her dream. And her quote, "Working in the space program is so much fun because the opportunities are as big as your imagination." And this was something that she built, award-winning logo design of a spacecraft, which won a national award. So we are so lucky to have them with us and look forward to hearing telling us their stories.
Linda, thanks a whole lot. We're all very pleased to be here, and we're sorry that the light makes the visuals not quite as good as they would have been in a really dark room, but hopefully you can see them well enough. So we're all here to illustrate for you how exciting it can be if you get an education in science and engineering, science or engineering. There are all sorts of really, really exciting things you can do. And so we're just showing you some of those from our careers, and hopefully some of these will sort of spark your interest in just the huge variety of what you can do if you get a science and engineering education. So in my case, as Linda mentioned, I have been to the Antarctic and also to the North Pole. And so I'm going to show some of the pictures from the Antarctic first, although this particular, this cover picture is from the North Pole area. This one is the expedition team to Antarctica. If you, in a dark room, you'd be able to see that I'm the only female. I was the only female on the expedition, the only female on the ship going down, the only female on the entire island we were on. At that time, this was when I was a graduate student way back in the early 1970s. At that time, almost no females had ever gone down to Antarctica to do research, and so it was very unusual. The captain of the ship, who's actually one of the individuals on this photo, the captain of the ship was extremely upset when he found out a female was coming on his ship. He had never had a female go down to Antarctica before, and this was very upsetting to him, although after a couple of days he was very nice and quite all right with it. It was just a real shock at first. So this is on our way to Antarctica in the ship. This is as we're getting close. You start seeing some ice, and then a little more ice, and then more ice, and then you start seeing beautiful scenery along the edge of Antarctica, and then you get nothing but ice, ice and snow. It was thrilling to get to go down there. We were working on a volcanic island just off the continent itself, and so there's some volcanic ash around here, and you could also, I'm kind of walking toward where the well was because we had to collect our water whenever we wanted water for anything, drinking or anything else. We had to go collect it from the well. Every day when we went out to work, we would go out to work in this little rubber boat called a Zodiac. So we would travel in the little rubber Zodiac boat across to get to the other side because of the volcanic activity. It was felt we had to sleep on the side that was furthest away from the volcanic activity. But our research itself was actually right at the center of the volcano, and so that was very exciting. It was very steep, and you can see, well, partly you can see from this picture how steep it was. This is the, I was a graduate student, this is the leader of the expedition struggling down on this very steep volcanic slope, and what we were measuring was the ice flowing back in to the volcano. So in other words, the volcano had erupted, but there had been ice all over because it is Antarctica. So there had been ice and snow all over. The volcano erupted, got ash all over everything, but the ice went and flowed back in. So that's what we were measuring there. Because of the volcanic activity, there's a lot of heat, and the very top layer of the water, it was really, it was a challenge for that everybody who went down there at that time, you were challenged to, can you swim in this water? All the water was freezing cold except the very top layer was scalding hot because of volcanic activity. So the trick was you stir it up enough so that it's bearable. And so, being the only female on the island, I had to do this, you know. There was just no way that I was not going to take this challenge and swim in this water. And it was neat to get to do that. Now, for those who are close enough to see, there are thousands of penguins on this island, and here are several hundreds of the penguins on this island. Here I am right in amongst the penguins. And actually at that time, now you wouldn't be allowed to pick the penguins up, and I'm very glad that they made that rule. But at that time, way back in the early 70s, the regulations weren't there. That's like one of my favorite pictures that I took of a penguin. So that's my favorite picture that I took of a penguin. That's my favorite picture that I took of an elephant seal. So that's an elephant seal. Now, we came back on a different boat, a different ship than the one we went down on. We went down on the little ship that I showed you before. We came back on a tourist ship. This is the Lindblad Explorer. That's another cool thing about being a scientist. We got free passage on this ship just by giving a few talks to the tourists. So if you become a scientist, you can do some really neat tourist type stuff, but get paid for it by giving a few talks. So that's another huge plus there of being a scientist. And here's a picture of the big Lindblad Explorer with the ice of Antarctica in the background. Now, another expedition I was on is up in the Bering Sea, which is the sea that's in between Alaska and Siberia. So that sea has a lot of ice in it, but this is before we got to the ice cover. We sent up balloons with instruments on them to get measurements of the atmospheric conditions, and then we put buoys into the ocean, and here we're pulling one of these buoys out to get measurements that in the ocean. But the key thing we were looking for was measurements of the ice. And now, this might not be all that apparent, but there's a lot of ice in this picture, and there's also some instrumentation of taking radiation measurements on that platform. Here's the ship we were on in the Bering Sea, and if you look closely right in the left of it, there's a helicopter. And so we took the helicopter to get to the much bigger ice floes further away. And here I am at the main meteorological tower we had a little bit further away from the ship. But for most of our work, we were actually working fairly close to the ship, and we would go by a boat. We would get in the boat and be lowered down from the ship, and then go out to the smaller sea ice floes. Even a sea ice floe of that size that you see in the upper right there, you can actually walk on and not feel too worried about falling. And so I was standing on a floe about that size here, and we were about to put our buoys on. Here, we would drill a hole and then stick the buoy in it, and the buoy had a little radar transmitter at the top that we would then measure from the ship. And here I am sort of hooking up a big orange ball that would help us with the helicopter later to spot exactly where it was so we could go pick up the buoy in the end. So, and then the final trip that I'm going to tell you about is a trip that I was chief scientist on for NASA in 1999, and it was to the North Pole, but by way of Resolute Bay, which is a small Inuit community in northern Canada. This is pretty much the whole community shown there. 202 people, and no other towns or communities for like hundreds of miles. So, you know, that was the whole community. The Canadian government flies in once a month nurse and dentist in case there are any needs for medical attention. And so there's no nurse or dentist or doctor living in the community, And there's also practically no crime in the community because everybody knows everybody else. And so there's only like the 2 policemen for a gigantic area, not just this community, but the communities over hundreds of miles around. And so here's a little bit more on the community. The church is in the left there. This is the house that we stayed in for a week as we were preparing for the North Pole expedition. This is the team. Again, I was the only female. However, by this time, you could have had more females. It just turned out that the people who signed up for this trip were males, mostly, other than me. And here I am with one of the Inuits with his dog. Here we encountered a real Arctic storm. That was kind of exciting. Here we're setting up our tents in Eureka, which was another stop on the way to the North Pole. Eureka is on the island, Ellesmere Island, which is just to the west of Greenland. It's in northern Canada at 80 degrees north. Here, flying over the Arctic sea ice, and here we had to stop. We had one stop from Eureka to the North Pole to resupply the fuel. The plane was not big enough to carry both us and all the fuel, so we had to cache some fuel on a sea ice floe halfway there and then stop, pick up that fuel, dump off the empty fuel tanks, and then go the rest of the way. Here we are, having landed about 2 miles from the North Pole, and this is what we hooked up with there. We hooked up with the dog sled team, which was really cool. The North Pole there's floating ice in the North Pole. It's very different from the South Pole, whereas at the South Pole, it's ice that's on top of land. The North Pole, the ice is floating. So you can't be confident with a plane that you're going to be able to land at the North Pole. However, dog sleds are much more able to get you to the exact North Pole, which is what we wanted. So we hooked up with the dog sled team. There I am with one of the dogs. Here we are on the dog sled trip, and here we are headed to the North Pole, and we got to the exact spot, and this is me with the leader of the dog sled team at the exact spot of the North Pole. So those are expeditions that I've been on. Very, very cool to get to go on expeditions like this and take measurements that are of some scientific value. So it's one of the types of really cool things that scientists and engineers get to do. But another really cool thing that I get to do in my career is be involved with satellite imagery and satellite data. I'm the project scientist of a particular mission called the Aqua mission. Aqua spacecraft is shown on the left here, and you can see the size because you've got people at the bottom. So that was before we launched. And then the launch is showed on the right. We launched back in 2002, so we've just finished a 10-year anniversary of our launch. We've gotten all sorts of great data. It's really exciting to see a launch and to know that something you've been working on for years is successfully finally getting up into space. And so here are some images from that spacecraft. Here's one of a hurricane. This happens to be Hurricane Irene, which many of you will have remembered from a year ago. So that's satellites are so valuable to us in terms of showing us where hurricanes are and how they're tracking well before they reach land. Years ago, before satellites were available, hurricanes would strike sometimes without any forewarning at all. And we're so lucky now to have satellites that let us know that there's a hurricane out there. Another really valuable aspect is the satellites show fires really well. The U.S. Forest Service has used these images, which I'm sorry don't show up well on the with so much light, but they show fires really well, and that's really valuable for the U.S. Forest Service to determine where to deploy firefighters. They showed that oil slick from Deepwater Horizon oil spill. They show lots of global images. Here happens to be all the radiation that's going out to space from the Earth. They show things like the number of fires in a particular year, and we're of course most concerned about the fires in the U.S., but if you look at a global picture like this, you'll see that fires in the U.S. are really very infrequent compared to how many fires you get in especially the tropical rainforest areas where there are huge, huge, huge numbers of fires. Now here we also get to see the sea ice cover, which is what much of my work has been involved with, and original pictures tend to have lots of missing data that we then have to analyze and then get much better pictures out. This is the Arctic case, and in the Arctic in the wintertime on the left, it's way, way, way more ice than in the summertime, which is on the right. In the wintertime, the amount of ice, it covers an area about 1.5 times the area of the United States. So a whole lot of area is covered. And then we plot it up. So this goes back to 1978 up to 2010, and every year, way more ice in the winter, way less ice in the summer. And so what we really want to look at is how's it changing over time. So we take that cycle out, and when we do that, that same set of data becomes this set of data, and you can see how the Arctic sea ice has been going down. That's been important in terms of looking at climate change, and the sea ice has become kind of iconic in terms of the sea ice decreases in the Arctic are one of the very strong indicators of global warming that people have become quite concerned about, and polar bears are often mentioned as one of the species that's been really hurt by the loss of the sea ice. We do have a website that we update every week, so you could get the new sea ice every week if you want. And we also look at the Antarctic just equally as much as we look at the Arctic. And this is wintertime in the Antarctic on the left, which is exactly the opposite time of year from wintertime in the northern hemisphere. So wintertime in the Antarctic is February, it's a September picture, and summertime is a February picture. In the Antarctic, the results are opposite from the Arctic in terms of the Antarctic ice has been increasing. A lot of studies are being done to try to understand why. So 2 more slides for me, and these show one other type of thing, and again, we're trying to give you a flavor of you can do really exciting things if you become a scientist or an engineer. And one of the things I've really enjoyed doing is getting to write books. Linda had mentioned that I've written several books, and I enjoy both writing them by myself, and the 2 on the left I did by myself, but I also enjoy working with other people and writing books that are either edited with other people or written with other people, and one of those is on the right. And then last slide is 3 more of my books. The one on the left was actually history of science, because I'm really interested in the history of science also. And then the one in the middle is modeling of science, and that was with colleague Warren Washington. And then the one at the bottom right, we actually have copies. We have copies for everybody here if you would like copies. We have copies both of the book, if you would like those, and also small versions of the 6 posters that Linda mentioned also. So we've got those for everybody here, and Florence and Mary and I are all both on the posters and in the book. So with that, I will now turn it over to Florence.
Okay, thank you for having me, and my name is Florence Tan, and I work at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center.
It's hard to hear you.
Oh, okay.
Project a little bit more.
Okay, I'll try and speak louder. And I'm an engineer. I built electronics for, I guess you guys have heard of the Mars rover, right? Everybody has heard, oh good. So I don't have to like explain this. Anyhow, I have a movie. I don't know if it'll play well, but I'll try to see if it comes. this.
Oh, that's neat.
So this is the movie of the rover. You may have seen this.
It's crazy. That's a very natural thing. It is the result of reasoned engineering. It still looks crazy. The top of the atmosphere, down to the surface, it takes us 7 minutes. It takes 14 minutes or so for the signal from the spacecraft to make it to Earth. That's how far Mars is away. So when we first get word that we touched the top of the atmosphere, the vehicle has to arrive dead on the surface for at least 7 minutes.
Entry, descent, and landing, also known as EDL, referred to as the 7 minutes of terror, because we've got literally 7 minutes to get from the top of the atmosphere to the surface of Mars, going from 13,000 miles an hour to 0. Perfect sequence, perfect choreography, perfect timing, and the computer has to do it all by itself with no help. If any one thing doesn't work just right, it's game over.
Slam into the atmosphere and develops so much aerodynamic drag. Our shield, it heats up and it glows like the surface of the sun. 1,600 degrees.
During entry, the vehicle is not only slowing down violently through the atmosphere, but also we are guiding it like an airplane to be able to land in a very narrow constraint space. This is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, and one that we have never attempted on Mars.
Mars is actually really hard to slow down because it has just enough atmosphere that you have to deal with. Otherwise, it will destroy your spacecraft. On the other hand, it doesn't have enough atmosphere to finish the job. We're still going about 1,000 miles an hour. So at that point, we use a parachute.
The parachute is the largest and strongest supersonic parachute that we've ever built to date. It has to be able to withstand 65,000 pounds of force, even though the parachute itself only weighs about 100 pounds.
When it opens up that fast, it's a neck-snapping 9 Gs.
At that point, we have to get that heat shield off. It's like a big lens gap blocking our view of the ground to the radar. The radar has to take just the right altitude and velocity measurements at just the right time, or the rest of the landing sequence won't work.
This big, huge parachute that we've got, it'll only slow us down to about 200 miles an hour. And that's not slow enough to land. So we have no choice, but we've got to cut it off and then come down in rockets. Once we turn those rocket motors on, we don't do something, we're just going to smack right back into the parachute. So the first thing we do is make this really radical divert. Fly off to the sun.
Diverting away from the parachute, killing our horizontal velocity and our vertical velocity, getting the rover moving straight up and down so it can look at the surface with its radar and see where we're going to land, and we get straight down to the bottom of a crater, right beside a 6-kilometer high mountain.
We can't get those rocket engines too close to the ground, because if we were to descend propulsively our engines all the way to the ground, we would essentially create this massive dust cloud. That dust cloud would then go and land on the rover, and damage mechanisms and damage instruments. So the way we solve that problem is by using the skyscraper.
20 meters above the surface, you have to lower the rover below us on a tether that's 21 feet long, and then gently deposit it on its wings on the surface.
As the rover touches down and is now on the ground, the descent stage, it's in a collision course with the rover. We must cut the bridle immediately and fly the descent stage to a safe distance from the rover.
Wow, very good.
That always gives me chills. But you know, this is what we were. And we made it. This is the SAM team, and I'm part of that team. And you can see us. Really, it was. When we landed, we're on Mars, right? We were there starting about 9 p.m. Pacific time, and when we, you know, I was just jumping up and down on my chair. We didn't know what to, and you could see the stuff, and we knew the data that came down was going to be 14 minutes old. So we did not know whether we were safe or not. And every single time, you know, the announcer would say, "Okay, parachute deploy," and there was this loud cheer. And then, you know, we've done, you know, the lowering, you know, loud cheer. But we knew, you know, in the back of my head, I knew, okay, this is done already. You know, the data is done. You know, we don't know whether we crashed or not, but we're done. And when I reprise the emotion, you know, we've worked on this thing for at least 10 years. The proposal came out, so this whole thing is not just a one-time thing. It's the fact that we had a few hundred people, thousands, actually 4,000 people or so work on this mission for 6 years. And before that, there was a proposal. You know, so there's all this emotion that you just cannot imagine. It's like giving birth to a child, except it took 10 years. Just kind of, you know, maybe. But anyhow, we got there, and after, you know, we got there, and it was unbelievable because Mars is really, really hard. I mean, I will talk extemporaneously because I have slides that show that. But the Mars, most of our Martian 60% fail. You know, from Earth to Mars, we basically not passed because of the atmosphere, because how hard it is. Now, a little bit about this rover. I talked to all these guys who were on they become mini celebrities. It's kind of interesting. The guy who talked about how, you know, it was really hard to, how you had the tether. He actually was invited by the president of Argentina. He's Argentinian by birth, to go meet her when he went to visit his family. I'm originally from Malaysia. I don't know if they'll invite me to the, you know, palace or not. But it's kind of neat, you know, like we all get the little mini celebrityhood every 10 years or so. 15 minutes of fame, you know. And I know on Facebook my friends say, "Oh, you know, this person works on the Curiosity rover." It's kind of neat, you know. But the whole thing is that if you do science and math, there's still periods, you know, you kind of do data stuff, but you're still having a little fun because occasionally you get invited to the president's palace. Every 10 years, not bad. The other thing that's interesting about this rover landing is that the guy who was talking about the rover landing, it turns out that it is much easier to land this rover, calculation, you know, when they simulated it, than it was to do. Remember the rovers that they had with the bouncing balls with the big airbags? Those were much harder because you could not understand the physics. Once it comes down, it's chaos theory. You know, you have to figure out where it's going to bounce. You don't know if it's going to bounce on a mountain or a little rock. So it turns out that it's much easier to simulate. The physics works well. They put dampeners in the. By the way, the tethers, they're made of nylon. You know, like your clothes string, 3 nylon. Holding it. So it's kind of neat. You know, you hear all these like little things that, you know, on the side that you don't hear when JPL is pushing out, you know, all this public affairs stuff. But what's really neat is you talk to the people, and the guy finally told me, he said, you know, Miguel is his name, Miguel someone. He said, "We landed with style." I like that. So we're in Mars. Now what? Well, we look around, touchdown confirm, and the words were, "Let's see what Curiosity will take us." And this is the first picture. I don't know if you can see it, but you know, it's kind of dark. It's too bad. But the picture of that mountain there is Mount Sharp, and we also have again, you know, I'm sorry. We have 17 cameras on this rover. It's the size of a Mini Cooper, the wheelbase of a Hummer. It goes kind of slow, you know, but it can go in an hour, 1.5 football fields. Not very fast, but still, you know, we're not doing it fast. We have 2 years. Mission life is 2 years. 1 Martian year. Oh, who knows what 1 Martian day is called? Anyone? No. It's called a SOL, S-O-L. So I have been working on Martian time. So when I go to work, I'm working on a Martian day. So the Martian day is 24 hours and 35 minutes approximately. So my clock resets 35 minutes more. I go to bed 35 minutes later, or I wake up 35, it's just bizarre. So what happens is all our windows are darkened so that when we work in this control room, we're not affected by the sun, so that we can, actually I don't even know what time. It's funny when you work in this kind of environment, you don't even know what day it is, you just know what sol it is. For example, I can tell you today is sol 80. We've been on Mars for 80 sols. But I cannot tell you how many days has passed. And I cannot tell you what day of the week it is, and I cannot tell you what date it is. Because you lose perspective. And so you work very, very hard, but it's really exciting because every day some picture comes and there's this loud cheer because, we've wiggled our wheels, we had to wiggle our wheels, we had to take pictures, and it's really neat to see the stuff, this fruition of all the work that we put in come to pass. It's really amazing. And so here they had to, the first time you come down, there's a lot of engineering, what we call commissioning tests. You do your camera, take some pictures, you move your arm up, you unfold your wheels. Actually, the wheels, all they did was wiggle, and then just to make sure that you can work every mechanism. And then you do there are 10 instruments on the rover, so you test every instrument. You do these very basic tests that you had planned for quite a few, for a year. When we launched in November 25th, 2011, from November 25th, 2011 to August 5th, 2012, we had training every month, kind of like the way you go on for a big play, theater, where you have production time. And so we had training on all the tools, on how to communicate. We had to learn to talk. Like, for example, I can't just say, hey, control room, this is Florence. I can't say that. So we all have roles. So like, for example, I'm a payload downlink lead and a payload uplink lead. So uplink, you send commands, downlink, you get data. So you have to say, and then you have to say to the payload downlink coordinator. Now NASA is full of TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. So it's PDC, PDL, Sam PDL speaking. That's how you talk. You get the person you want to talk to, and then you identify yourself. Then you say what you want to ask. So it's kind of interesting that way. There's a whole bunch of lingo, whole bunch of details that you have to understand. That you don't. So in the beginning it was kind of funny because we were all a little bit awkward. But in the beginning, towards the end, it's like PDC, PDL, and it's really fast, and nobody understands what you're talking about. And get parachuted down. So we saw lots and lots of rocks. So and pictures, and we've now taken some data with the atmospheric experiments too. And I'll show you some stuff. So the trip took over 8 months. We traveled 354 million miles. As I told you, it's really, really hard. 60% of the missions ended in failure on Mars. So we've been really good recent. We've been. If you see the red stuff, that's failure. The blue stuff is the more recent successes. And recently we've learned how to work this issue. And so it's Curiosity, picture of Curiosity. And so why are we going to Mars? Turns out we want to understand what the environment of Mars is, whether it has any potential, past, present, and maybe future habitability that we may or may see. So there's a lot of signatures of say life that you can, not even life, it's actually isotope ratios that you're actually looking for, but that's what we're looking for. We're looking at the biological potential, the geology, the geochemistry, the role of water, surface radiation, and different things that make up what we think Mars is. Mars is very interesting to scientists because of that. So I just talked about it. You can't quite see this, but I just talked about this. So again, this is can you see this? This is better, right? Yeah, this is this is the rover. It's it's pretty tall. The mast it looms over my head. Actually, I wish I put a picture of me. I was actually under the rover looking at something, and somebody took a picture. I was like a rover mechanic, so to speak. So here's a picture of the different rovers that we have. Our rover is very, very large. It's about 900 kilograms, and the reason it's so big is because we have these 10 instruments. It's the most capable rover that we've taken to Mars. And Sojourner and Opportunity and Spirit, which, by the way, Opportunity and Spirit is still going on after these many years, and is also part of the Pathfinder that allows us to bring this large rover to Mars. It's funny, the building we operate in, we're on the 4th floor. All the Mars people are on the floor. We call it the 4th floor, and then there's the 7th floor is the MER people. This is the Opportunity and Spirit people. So the MSL Curiosity rover people is here, and then the Opportunity is 7th floor. The 8th floor is the managers, and then the 6th floor is where we do our meetings and stuff. So we know which floor people are going to when you look at their badges. So it's kind of neat. So the Curiosity again, very, very very heavy. And this is me in front of the rover in Florida just before it launched. So here in Maryland, what are our roles? We contribute to one of the instruments called SAM, and it's called Surface Analysis at Mars. And I am the electrical lead for this instrument. It is the most complex instrument we've ever flown in space, ever, because it's got, let's see, it's a suite of 3 instruments. It's a quadruple mass spectrometer, tunable laser spectrometer, and 6 GC columns. But it has these major, like 72 cups that you can take soil samples in, and it goes around in a carousel and goes into an oven. The oven can go up to 1100 degrees Celsius, about 1600 Fahrenheit. Very hot. Okay, so we have 2 ovens. We also have we carry our own helium. The helium tanks are pressurized to about 2,000 pounds per square inch. We also have these pumps, these turbomolecular pumps, because you can't just use any pump to pump helium and all this stuff out. The pumps go up to 105,000 RPM. Now your cars go up to what, 9,000? So we have to solve pretty complex engineering problems, and it's really fun because I don't actually go to work and say, wow, let's go, buy some pumps from the pump store. It doesn't work. So everything has to be solved, and you make it an investigation. So the pumps have to, and we, of course, when you start building something, you run into problems immediately. Oh, guess what? The ball bearings are not holding up. We have something called Brunelling. Because you can't, the other thing is that you want to pump something that you're trying to measure very sensitive stuff with. You can't just use WD-40 on the, because you're going to have all kinds of biochemistry signatures. It doesn't work. So you have to research every detail, and that kind of, where you have limitations, but the limitations are such that you have to figure it out, and then it's like a puzzle. So if anyone likes puzzles, if you're an engineer, you like puzzles, it's great, because every day you're like, well, let's build this. Okay, this doesn't work. Okay, let's do this. So I never tell my guys, do this. It's more like, what if? That whole HP ad that says what if, and it's true. For engineering, you do what ifs, a lot of them. So, for example, to get gas coming into the SAM instrument, you have to, Mars is really cold. The Mars temperature diurnal cycle goes from like minus 100, Antarctica is cold, but Mars is cold. Yes. We got a little bit on you. So it's like 105 degrees below zero to about, you can go as hot as maybe 20 degrees above zero, Fahrenheit. So we have to deal with such extremes every day. When you want to sample gas from Mars, if you're not, and it's a lot warmer in the instrument because we have a nice little radiothermal generator, nuclear power generator to provide us power, so we are a lot warmer than, say, the atmosphere. When you come in and you take gas in, the first thing it does is what does it do? It condenses. So we will get arteriosclerosis or, heart attack, Our pipes are really tiny. Our pipes are, some of the pipes are the inner diameter is as small as your hair's diameter. 5/1000th of an inch, very small. So we have to heat these lines up. What do? We wrap every line with a heater. Guess what? You want to heat it up to 135 degrees C. It's going to burn up the wires that bring the electricity to heat it up. So we had to research like special wires. So what I did was, I had a baking project. You guys know baking, right? You just put the thing in the oven and you look at it over and so there's a lot of investigations like that. And so that's why it's fun. Anyhow, so this is me in front of the instrument working. Let's see, where did we land? We landed, so if Mars is like Earth, we landed on the equator, a little bit south of the equator. And again, the name of the place we landed is called Gale Crater. And see, this is where we're at right here, like we use Google on it. And I wanted to show you pictures of as we were landing. This is the parachute that was snapped and captured by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and you can see our parachute. And this is the heat shield falling away from the rover as we were coming down. And again, this is kicking out the dust. You can see this is like a circle, but that was the dust that was kicked up by all the thrusters. I don't know if you can see, but there's scour marks from the landing engines, and we can see, we call it GODDARD. And again, there's a tiny little dot there. You can see again, there's tracks. You can't see the tracks, but there are tracks on it's so clear that the MRO orbiter could capture it. This is the panoramic picture of Mount Sharp. Here is, again, if you have time, go to JPL's website. Some of these pictures are there, a lot of them are there. And this is the self-portrait of the camera that we take pictures with. Here's some wheels. Again, I'm sorry this is not coming out. And we started using our lasers to zap the rocks. And there are actually holes here. I don't know if you can see these, but these are the holes created by our ChemCam laser. And the ChemCam laser allows us to investigate the contents of the mineralogy on the rock. Here is a picture of our wheel. You can't quite see. It looks like a footprint. We landed on some sand dunes. So before we've scooped about 4 scoops already of stuff, and we've analyzed it. So anyway, here is a hot summer day on Mars. It's very, very cold. And I showed you told you the temperatures. So we're going to this place called Glen Elk. I guess humans are kind of funny. We go to a place and we name it after, some place in Scotland or some place, name after, Bradbury, Ray Bradbury had died, so we named the landing site after him. So it's kind of neat that way. We go, that's why we have places like New York, right? New York, as opposed to York, England. So every day, my daily schedule starts every day. When we start, we receive the data, we get the science team together, we put the status report together, and we plan our day every day to make sure, and then we review the plan because you don't want to send the wrong commands up and fail, right? Because this is a national asset. It's $2.5 billion. You paid for it. Thanks. So every day is like a lot. Like we look at it very carefully, and we really think about what we're going to do, and we kind of go between the scientists and the engineers and the scientists. I want to go here. I want to go here, and then it's as the project scientist John Grotzinger said. It's like you're driving a car from here, from LA to San Francisco, but with 400 passengers, and they're all scientists. And they all want to go, let's go there, let's go there. No, I want to see this, I want to see that, no. And then the engineers, who's the driver, go, wait, we don't have enough fuel. Wait, that's not enough time to do this. Wait, your data downlink rates is not fast enough. So all these has to be pulled together. And we work many hours to get this to work, and it's a collaborative effort, and it's really neat because this is There's no politics, no anything. We're just doing it pure for the fun and the science of it. So you should all be scientists. But we tested every part of the rover landing process. The parachute, for example, was taken to Ames Research Center. They have the world's largest wind tunnels, and that was unfurled and tested there. We tested the rover. In fact, I was there when it happened, and the press was also there, where they had to lower, fire the pyros and lower on tether. That was tested in a giant hangar at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, in Pasadena, California. We tested, the every part of the heat shield. All these things were tested by itself. Now, we did not test everything together. So we didn't know if it was going to all choreograph and come together the way it was supposed to be. So that was a key. But we still have very good engineers that thought about this stuff. And what we could not test, we simulated using software. So it's a lot riding on it.
It's some kind of extraordinary prize for this. I mean, really, it's just, I'm thinking of another Peace Prize, but something of this nature is just so phenomenal.
It was scary. Actually, some reporter asked me, what do you think? Do you think you'll land? And that was before we landed. I said, kind of couldn't tell them, I'm kind of filled with trepidation, but, so I said, we have simulated, and I said the truth, we've simulated every piece of this. We have very good engineers. We've thought of this, and God knows we had a long time to think about it. So we figured it out. So that's what that aspect is. Yes?
Florence, were you involved from the entire 10 years? Were you part of the proposal as well?
I was okay, let me tell you what happened. So we were, as part of the proposal, we wanted to do this proposal, but I had just come off a project where it had exploded, so there was no money for operations. So we were basically existing on fumes. So we have partners, different engineering partners, to come to this proposal. And Paul, the principal investigator, Paul Mahaffey, said to me, I want you to lead this electronics effort. But I didn't have, there was no money, so I went off to work for another group. In the meantime, the proposal was coming, you still need to, propose. So another engineer was he's our consultant, John, coming from Michigan. There was no money, so he flew in on his own dime. I picked him up from Greenbelt Station because he flew on the Blue Line. He lived with us while we worked together on the proposal, and that went on for about a year.
Wow.
Back and forth. He would fly in from Michigan, and then we'll work. And then when we had money, finally he could, actually travel, normally. But it's personal. This is personal. It's not, you don't do this because you like the idea of being an engineer or you do it because you really like, you believe in the mission. That's what it is. It's a passion. Any more? Question? Yes.
How was the sky crane method decided on, and what other possible methods were considered for lowering the vehicle footprint?
I actually don't know the answer to that. You can answer that? Okay. Go.
Well, I can answer it from a very high level, because I was the AA for science when this came into headquarters. We needed to do the sky crane because previously with the balloon landings, where we just bounced our way in, the rovers were very small, and we couldn't use that technique for this larger rover, and we knew we wanted all these instruments. We had to have all these instruments simultaneously in order to be able to nail whether there was life on Mars at some time. So we were desperate to have the heavier rover, and the sky crane was by far the least risky of these stores. At NASA headquarters, we started inside the building. We had a simulation of the 7 minutes of terror, and the first time we aired it was in a meeting where we have all the upper staff at NASA headquarters, we have these internal meetings to decide what we're going to do, and so I decided just to bite the bullet and try it with everybody in the room. So I just sat back and played this thing and watched everybody's face just blanch white. I mean, absolutely white, because nobody wants to be in a situation where they take that much obvious risk with this big an investment. I mean, this is hard to convince Congress it's a good thing to do. It's hard to convince the White House, because nobody wants a failure on their hands. But we didn't have any choice, basically. This was the least riskiest thing we could do to get the data we had to
Yeah, I knew about the fact that it was too heavy to land the airball way, but I didn't this is great, and I didn't also understand if there were other options, you know, because
There were riskier options.
Yeah.
I mean, but we had to convince everybody. So the big job was, the difference was, we were very, very lucky at that point in time, because we had Mike Griffin as NASA administrator, and he was an aerospace engineer. I mean, he has a book on aerospace engineering, you know, a textbook. And so we were actually able to brief him and convince him that this was...
It's exciting that we're learning from each other as here.
Yeah.
And now Mary will speak on her own behalf.
Oh, yeah, okay. My turn? Yeah, let me just, does anybody want to stand up? We have kids. They might want to stand up for a second and stretch a little bit.
yeah.
You want to stand up and stretch a little bit? Lift your hands up. Yeah. We're not waiting for a lunch or a wedding.
We want to thank you for coming to the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. We thank Free Fall Baltimore for helping us be able to have this program. And we need to make sure that you fill out your evaluation forms and write wonderful things if you feel them, so that we can hopefully continue to have programs here on various